Good afternoon. Welcome to part 3 of our devotion on Max Lucado's 6 Hours One Friday. If you've never read a book by Max Lucado, I'm going to highly suggest that you do. This is probably my favorite and certainly appropriate for Holy Week, which is why I wanted to share it with you. But what we're going to do here in part 3 is we're going to talk about the third anchor point from the book, and that is my death is not final. So anchor point number 1, to hold us tightly and securely to Jesus and to the cross, is my life is not futile. The second one we covered was my failures are not fatal. We're actually going to do another study from that. And then the last one is going to be my death is not final, this one here. There is one more stone to which you should tie, one more anchor that you should have in your life. It's large, it's round, and it's heavy. It blocked the door of a grave, and it wasn't big enough. The tomb that it sealed was the tomb of a transient. He only went in to prove he could come out. And on the way out, he took the stone with him and turned it into an anchor point. He dropped it deep into the uncharted waters of death, tied to his rock, and the typhoon of the tomb becomes a spring breeze on Easter Sunday. Beautiful, isn't it? One of the reasons I like Max Lucado so much. So I'll tell you, I had to pray about this particular study you're going to see, because it is unusual. It's very different. I like parables. I like stories. And what this chapter does, is called, it's chapter 16, The Sparkle from Eternity. What this chapter does is that it makes a biblical story modern. It takes the facts of a story from the Bible, does it very well, by the way, and modernizes everything. So as I read it, if I see a point where I think I can modernize it a little bit, I will. But the fact of the matter is, I want you to understand what you're going to hear, because it is unusual. It's not the details exactly the same as the biblical story, but you should be able to recognize the story very well. However, it is well written, especially the ending, and I want to share it with you. The Sparkle from Eternity. Wallace was an important man. He was the kind of man you would find leading a prayer at the football games or serving as president of the Lions Club. He wore a title and a collar and had soft hands, no calluses. He had a nice office just off the sanctuary. His secretary was a bit stale, but he wasn't. He had a warm smile that melted your apprehension as you walked through his office door. He sat in a leather swivel chair and had diplomas on the wall. He had a way of listening that made you willing to tell secrets that you'd never told anyone. Wallace loved people. This morning, though, he doesn't want people. He wants to be alone. He rings his secretary and advises her that he is not taking any more calls for the rest of the day. She doesn't think it's unusual. He's been on the phone all morning. She thinks he needs time to study. She's partly correct. He has been on the phone all morning, and he does need time. Not time to study, however. He needs time to weep. Through watery eyes, he gazes at his 12-year-old daughter. Braces, pigtails, freckles. She is a reflection of his wife. Blue eyes, brown hair, cute little nose. The only thing she got from her father was his heart. It began 6 days ago. She came home early from school, feverish and irritable. His wife put her to bed, thinking it was the flu. During the night, the fever rose. The next morning, they rushed her to the hospital. The doctors were puzzled. They couldn't pinpoint the problem. They could only agree on one thing. She was getting sick and getting sicker. Inside, His emotions were a mighty river, and his dam was beginning to crack. It was the call from the doctor this morning that broke it. She is in a coma. He leans over, holds the picture to his face, and weeps. "Why don't you take me instead?" he screams. And so he goes outside, and suddenly a man enters the courtyard. He tells something to the other two people that are there. Then the three hurry out. "Must be a fight," Wallace thinks to himself. "Something's going on." Then he remembers, "Oh yeah, the teacher. The teacher's coming today. The teacher is here." Some even said this teacher was insane. The crowds hung around him like he was God's gift to humanity. "I'm going," Wallace replayed the neighbor's response in his head. "Yeah, sure you are. They say he can heal." He recalled his neighbor say, "Faith healers are an insult to our profession," he had declared while lecturing at the seminary last fall. "Parasites of the people, charlatans of the church, prophets for profit." He'd seen these guys on television stuffed into double-breasted suits, wearing mannequin smiles and powdered faces. He shakes his head and walks back to his desks, and he picks up the photograph. The events of that afternoon redirected Wallace's life. He told the story whenever he had a chance. He decided to go and see the teacher. He looked too normal. He had the clothing that you would expect of a 30-year-old to wear. No tie. Hairline receded a bit. Eyebrows bushy. Had a gleam in his eyes and a grin on his lips, as if he were watching you unwrap the birthday present that he just gave you. "That's him." "That's him," said someone next to him. "That's Jesus." When I got to the doorway, so did Jesus. Our eyes met. I froze. I guess I hadn't considered what I would say to him. Maybe I thought he would recognize me. Maybe I thought he'd ask me if there was anything he could do. "Oh, my daughter is sick, and I thought you might say a prayer." But that's not how it came out. The words log-jammed in my throat. I felt my eyes water, my chin quiver, and my knees hit the uneven pavement. "It's my daughter, my little girl. She's very sick. Could you please touch her so that she won't die?" I regretted those words as soon as I said them. If he's a man, then I've just asked him the impossible. If he's more than a man, what right do I have to make such a request? I didn't dare look up. I was ashamed. If the crowd was going anywhere, they were going to have to move around me. I didn't have the courage to raise my face. I guess he knew I didn't. He did it for me. I felt his fingers under my chin. He lifted my head. He didn't have to raise it far. He had knelt down in front of me. I looked into his eyes. The gaze of this young preacher embraced this old pastor like the arms of an old friend. I knew then. I knew this man from somewhere. I'd seen that look. I knew those eyes. But suddenly I lost his hand. It slipped out. I stopped and turned and saw him standing and looking. His abrupt stop surprised the crowd. They hushed. I noticed his face was pale. He spoke as if speaking to himself. "Someone touched me." "What?" "Someone touched me." I thought he was telling a joke. He turned, slowly studying each face. For the life of me, I couldn't tell if he was angry or delighted. He was looking for someone he didn't know, but knew he'd know when he saw them. "I touched you." The voice was beside me. Jesus pivoted. It was me. I'm sorry." The curtain of the crowd parted, leaving a girl on center stage. She was thin, almost frail. I could have wrapped my hand around her upper arm and touched my finger to my thumb. Her skin was Dark, her hair was in 100 braids with beads on each end. She was coatless. She hugged her arms to herself, hands squeezing bony elbows, as much out of fear as she was cold. Don't be afraid, Jesus asked. What's wrong? I have a disease. She looked at him, looked around at the throng of people. I was out of money. The doctors said it was just a matter of time. I didn't have anywhere else to go, but now... She lowered her eyes and began to smile. She smiled as if someone had just whispered some good news in her ear. I turned to look at the girl. For a moment, she looked at me. I wanted to say something to her. I think she felt the same urge. We were so different. But suddenly, we had everything in common. What a strange couple we were, huh? She with her needle-tracked arms and midnight lovers, I with my clean fingernails and sermon outlines. I had spent my life telling people not to be like her. She spent her life avoiding hypocrites like me. But now, we were thrust together against the enemy of death, desperately hoping that this country preacher could tie a knot in the end of our frazzled ropes so we could hang on. She was healed. But while she was speaking, some other men had worked their way into the crowd. They were standing behind me, and when I heard them speak, I immediately recognized their voices. They were from my congregation. One put his hand on my shoulder. No need to bother to teach her anymore. Your daughter is gone. The words came at me like darts, but Jesus interrupted them. Don't be afraid. Just trust me. The next moments were a blur of activity. We raced through the crowd. We jumped into the car of the man who had brought the news and sped to the hospital. The waiting room was chaotic. Church members, neighbors, friends were already gathering. Several wept openly. My wife, seated in one of the chairs, was pale, speechless. His eyes were red. Her eyes were red. Her hand trembled as she brushed away a tear. As I entered, people came to comfort me. Jesus stepped in front of them. They stopped and stared at this stranger. Why are you crying? He asked. She isn't dead. She's only asleep. They were stunned. They were insulted. Of all the insensitive things to say, someone shouted, "Who are you anyway?" But leaving was the last thing Jesus had on his agenda. He turned and within seconds was standing in front of my daughter's hospital room. He signaled for a few of us to follow. We did. The 6 of us stood at my daughter's bedside. Her face was ashen, her lips dry and still. I touched her hand. It was cold. Before I could say anything, Jesus' hand was on mine. With the exception of one instant, he never took his eyes off my daughter, but during that instant, he looked at me. He looked at me with that same look, that same slight smile. He was giving another gift and couldn't wait to see the response when it was opened. Princess. The words were said softly, almost in a whisper. Get up. Her head turned slightly, as if hearing a noise. Jesus stood back. Her upper body leaned forward until she was upright in bed. Her eyes were opened. She turned and put her bare feet on the floor and stood. No one moved as my wife and I watched our girl walk toward us. We held her for an eternity, half believing it couldn't be true and half not wanting to know it wasn't. But it was. For weeks after that day, I was puzzled. Well, of course, I was exuberant, but my joy was peppered with mystery. Everywhere I went, I saw his face. His look followed me. Even as I read this, I can see it. Head cocked just a bit. Tender twinkle of anticipation under bushy brows. That look that whispered, "Come here. I've got a secret." And now I know where I'd seen it before. In fact, I've seen it again several times. I saw it in the eyes of a cancer patient I visited yesterday, bald from chemotherapy, shadowed eyes from the disease. Her skin was soft and her hand bony. She recognized me when she woke. She didn't even say hello. She lofted her eyebrows, sparkled that sparkle, and said, "I'm ready, Wallace. I'm ready to go." I saw it last week as I spoke at a funeral. The widower, wrinkle-faced man with white hair and bifocals. He didn't weep like the others. In fact, at one point, I think I saw him smile. I shook his hand afterwards. "Don't worry about me," he exclaimed. Then he motioned for me to lean down so he could say something in my ear. "I know where she is. She's okay." But it was this morning that I saw it the clearest. I wanted to ask her for days, but the right moment never came. This morning it did. At the breakfast table, just the two of us, she was with her cereal and I had a newspaper, and I turned to my daughter and I asked her, "Princess, yeah, what was it like?" "What? While you were gone, what was it like?" She didn't say anything. She just turned her head slightly and looked out the window. And when she turned around again, the sparkle was there. She opened her mouth and then closed it and then opened it again and said, "It's a secret, Dad. A secret too good for words." Peace where there should be pain. Confident in the midst of a crisis. Hope defying despair. That's what the look says. It is a look that knows the answer to the question asked by every mortal. Does death have the last word? I can see Jesus wink as he gives the answer. Not on your life. I hope this helped you. You probably cried several times through it. I don't know how I got through it without doing it. But this is probably my favorite chapter in the book, and that's why I wanted to share it with you. So I want to encourage you, if you don't have the book, get it. Max Lucado, 6 Hours, One Friday. It's wonderful. Part 4 will be tomorrow. God bless you, and take care.